For many Buffalo Bills fans, the approach of the trade deadline was kind of like the anticipation of Christmas morning, except Santa Beane left nothing under the tree. We're getting to the bottom of it today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here. On today's episode, we are talking about the trade deadline that came and went yesterday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And again, like I said, in the cold open, it felt like Christmas morning when nothing was under the tree because we anticipated this trade deadline with a lot of thoughts in mind, especially covering receiver and, of course, defensive line where we are suffering from some injuries. But before I get into all of it and explain my takes on it, I want to thank everyone who has subscribed to the channel. And indeed, if you are not part of the channel, like I always say, it just takes a nanosecond to hit that subscribe button. We are approaching 1,000 subscribers, which will be a great milestone for the channel. And of course, please leave your comments and like the video. The comments are huge. They form the inspiration for much of what we do on the show. But let's talk about what we're going to discuss today on the show. And in my first segment, I'm going to talk about how draft woes actually equal trade angst. And then we'll get into the receiver rush to judgment. And you can see I'm wearing Tyrell Shaver's jersey today because I have some opinions on the receivers that perhaps might be of interest. And then we're going to talk about the Landon Jackson quandary. And I've got a lot to say about that situation. Then we'll talk about the attitude adjustment that actually the Bills seem to have listened to some of my videos from a couple of weeks ago, because there seems to be a complete attitude shift on the team, and I think we could talk about that and also keep that in mind as we are moaning about this trade situation. And then finally, we're going to talk about Brandon Beane's window problem, and I'll explain exactly what I mean by that, so stick around for the entire show. But now, let's jump into it. So it's time to blow the horn and go. Well, we just heard from Brandon Beane, and he indicated that he went home every bit as angry last night as many Buffalo Bills fans did. And if you spent any time on X last night, you would have experienced just that because the comments were raging. But when we get down to it, the importance of the trade deadline arises from two factors. Number one, injury. You have injuries on your team, you need people to come in. And certainly the Bills are suffering from that. The Super Bowl Chicago Bears-like defense, 85 Bears that is, that I predicted earlier in the offseason probably would be closer to being true had we not lost Ed Oliver and Michael Hoyt in successive games where we only really had the ability to have the two of them on the field for less than one half of football. It's a travesty and an absolute tragedy that both of those players are gone. And that would be a reason to attack the trade deadline. And then furthermore, you'd have to talk about receiver. Certainly Josh Palmer, who is supposed to be the number one receiver for the Bills and has shown some pretty good stuff. He was kind of coming on just before he got injured. And we're hoping, of course, that we get that back when he is back in a couple of weeks. But that would have been another reason to approach the trade deadline. But quite frankly, the other thing you have to look at for the reason of putting importance on the trade deadline is the draft, because draft woes equal trade angst. And I'll read a few names off to you. Cody Ford, Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Boogie Basham, Kaiir Elam, Terrell Bernard, Keon Coleman, Dwayne Carter, TJ Sanders, and Landon Jackson. Now, each and every one of those players I just mentioned is either no longer on the Bills or they are on the Bills and they're injured, and that was even official last week for Terrell Bernard. And Terrell Bernard, to me, I know he's a captain, but he looks more like a safety to me than a thumping linebacker and somebody who can get into gaps and stop the opposing team's run. But that aside, the point is the draft situation has been a little bit maddening at times because everyone I just mentioned has been out of rounds 1, 2, or 3. And to me, especially round 1 and round 2 players, you have to be looking for people you know are going to be able to start. And we have to realize that the Bills have not really hit on all of those picks. And you have to ask yourself why. Number one, is it because we did not properly assess the talent? And that can be the case at times. But then at other times, you look and see that these players end up on other teams. This is from years past, but Wyatt Teller was a guard the Bills drafted who they never really gave a chance apparently to develop, and he has been a stalwart and mainstay for the Cleveland Browns for years and years. So this actually happens, and it makes me question why it's so difficult to get this draft right when it seems obvious that certain players just should be selected. And it's a funny thing with the NFL because it's almost the same thing. Another one of my analogies is when we're watching the games on Sundays or whatever day or night it might be, and we see that there is a certain play that occurs where it's obvious what it was. Of course it was a catch. Of course he was inbounds or out of bounds, or it wasn't a catch, or it was a fumble. His knee was down. His knee wasn't down. Of course the ball made it across the line to gain. And yet the NFL struggles with getting this figured out with officials that are on the field that are supposed to be the best in the world at doing this. They can't get it right. But then finally, we're starting to see these days that the officials are getting a little bit better. We have quicker reviews. We have situations where coaches don't have to pull the red flag out of their sock or their pocket and toss it on the ground because officials can't get it right. And so I'm wondering when the Bills, in their drafting and in their player selection and how they are evaluating players, is going to hit some of the obvious things that are absolutely needed. And it also brings to mind that there's a notion, of course, and you guys have heard this, and I've said it before on the show, where the Bills seem reticent to play younger players. They are a little bit scared. They get cold feet of putting younger players on the field. And I've always maintained that younger players just need time to develop. You have to have time to develop. But if guys don't get chances or are put in the wrong spots or used incorrectly or somehow have their confidence broken, that could be a pretty big problem. But let's look at the fact that, yes, injuries are going to occur in the NFL, but how you draft and having players on your team that are doing the job that you need them to do is a huge part of not having to have the big worries that we approached the trade deadline with this season, and of course, many seasons. And it's especially unfortunate with the fact that, of course, Brandon Beane said he would have lost money yesterday. He doesn't have the cap space. I mean, look at some of the guys you've got extended and how they're contributing. We've got to start taking a 5,000 or a 10,000 foot view of this stuff because I have a feeling the Bills kind of zero in on these situations and are not seeing the big picture. But be that as it may, let's move on. So I'll be honest with you, I had that same Christmas morning jealousy of other teams, especially getting receivers. And even what we saw with the Jets fire sale, Sauce Gardner, Quinnen Williams. Oh, I would have loved to have had Quinnen Williams to help this defensive line. And in terms of receivers, Garrett Wilson. I had dreams of having Garrett Wilson walking into one Bills drive this morning. It didn't happen, and for whatever reason, it couldn't happen, whether the Jets were unwilling to trade in the division or the Bills just didn't have the cap space to accommodate things, any number of factors that would have prevented it. But I think we need to look a little bit more closely at our own receiver room. And certainly, things always look greener on the other side. Other teams seem to have it better. We were looking at getting other people, Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, Jacoby Myers. Brian Thomas Jr. would have been nice, but kind of hurt and unavailable. And, you wish we'd drafted Torrey Horton. And yet the Seahawks got yet another receiver in their stable to go along with him. So, yes, it hurts a little bit, but we've got to look at our own receiver room to the extent that it's not that horrifying. We have one big injury to Josh Palmer, but he's going to be back, we believe, in a couple of weeks or so. And other than that, Elijah Moore probably is not too far away from some of the other people that we have seen on other teams that we wished for in terms of a trade. Now, Keon Coleman, of course, a bit of a problem. He's getting more targets and more snaps than anybody else on the team. That shouldn't be the case. The Bills need to get that straightened out. But you've got a tight end room that is actually excellent, one of the best in the league. Dalton Kincaid, Jackson Hawes, catching flip balls. I mean, of course, he had the one drop that hurt Josh Allen's great completion percentage of 88.5%, a Bills record, even with that drop. And then, of course, Khalil Shakir had another, really wasn't dropped, that was a contested catch. But you have to say that the everyone eats mantra actually worked. The offense was very efficient with Josh throwing the ball against the Chiefs, one of the best defenses in the league still. And Spags, of course, you have to understand how difficult these games are going to be with Andy Reid and Spagnuolo calling the offense and defense respectively. The Bills have played them now 10 times since 2020. Guys, this is a division opponent. These are division games. I don't care what you say. They're playing them every bit as often as other division opponents, and certainly the Chiefs are more formidable. And certainly, even with the defense doing well, holding Patrick Mahomes to 15 of 34, 44% and change completion rate, and frankly, he got hit 15 times. He got the hell beat out of him. So I'm not really that far down on what's going on, especially with the defense and with the exception of the injuries, and certainly the offense with the way it performed when you've got a running game with James Cook such as you have and the receiver core that we do have that might not be that far off from some of these stars. No, we don't have a receiver that's getting 10 or 12 targets and 120 yards. We don't have Jamar Chase. But we do have one of the best tight end rooms in the league, certainly. Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Jackson Hawes, each catching balls. Kincaid, of course, and Knox having big catches. Kincaid having his first 100-yard game with 6 targets and 6 receptions. So I'm not so far down on the receiving situation because I think the everyone eats mantra, as much as it perhaps gets put down and as much as we had the Christmas morning jealousy of other teams having things under their tree that we did not get, I'm not that far down on the receiver room, and I'm not necessarily rushing to judgment on it. We'll see how it goes from here. Stick with me. Now, as we've already discussed, the injuries to Ed Oliver and Michael Hoyt, disastrous for the Bills defense. 2 of your best players, certainly, and they are both out for the season. Ed might return for a deep playoff run, but certainly Michael Hoyt is done with the Achilles. And as unfortunate as this is, of course, there's the next man up point to get to. And as far as that goes, the next man up in both of those cases for Ed Oliver has got to be TJ Sanders. And of course, TJ Sanders has had a few games, hasn't really flashed much. I think it takes a few games for guys to get the feel of the pro game and to get the feel of what they're doing on the field. And certainly seeing some of the veterans performing such as they have, and there's nothing like imitation to be able to get yourself better and improve your confidence. And I'm sure TJ Sanders will do so when we get him back on the field, which hopefully will be soon. And that would partially solve the Ed Oliver problem that we have. but we also have a Michael Hoyt problem. And the obvious answer to the Michael Hoyt issue, to me, is Landon Jackson. And yet, if you go and watch what people are saying on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it, Landon Jackson, oh, he's the reason we lost 2 games. The only 2 times he's been active, the Bills have lost. Give me a break. Give me a break. Landon Jackson played 16 snaps against the Patriots and only 12 against the Falcons. And if you want a reason why we lost to the Patriots, look at the daffy-ass rivalry uniforms that under the lights of the Ralph, with those chrome numbers, made them essentially illegible. I mean, tell me if you could tell the difference between our tight ends in that game, 85, 86, and 88. I couldn't. But the answer to the Michael Hoyt situation has got to be Landon Jackson. He's your 3rd-round draft pick, selected even before Deion Walker, a 4th-rounder who we don't even need to discuss because he's an obvious game wrecker, especially if you saw him throw Creed Humphrey aside on Sunday afternoon. That was great. But Landon Jackson needs to be on the field more. He's certainly got the size. He's got the athleticism. I've heard good film analyzers say that he just doesn't seem to have a feel for the game. Well, get him on the field so he can get a feel for the game. We've already got an example of how that can work, and it's in the form of safety Cole Bishop. He was thought of as perhaps a bust. I mean, he was a high pick last season, in his rookie season. He didn't get on the field because he was out of training camp with an injury for some time. Later on, he started looking a little bit better. Started to get a little bit of a feel for things later in the season. Comes on this season, does not look good. There's worry about it. And then finally the Bills figure out to pair him with Jordan Poyer as opposed to the rather injured Taylor Rapp, who he was trying to play next to. And what did we see as a result? Cole Bishop had his best game as a pro against the Kansas City Chiefs. Against the Kansas City Chiefs offense called by and largely coordinated by Andy Reid and quarterbacked by Patrick Mahomes. To the point where Mahomes had his worst completion percentage of his career at 44.5%. And conversely, of course, where Josh Allen had his best, as we discussed before. But Cole Bishop has succeeded because he's had a chance to be out on the field. He's had a chance to work with pros that are good. And it just takes some time. And I think the Bills need to do this now. They need to turn him into something of what Michael Hoyt was. The very first words Landon Jackson said to Brandon Beane the night he was drafted was, "You're getting a fucking dog." Well, let's give him a chance to be that dog. You can certainly destroy a player's confidence by putting them out there too early. How many quarterbacks have been wrecked by teams, high draft picks, and they put them on the field with coaches trying to save their jobs, and the quarterback's confidence is shot? Yes, that happens. But Landon Jackson is not a quarterback. He's a defensive end edge player, and he needs time on the field. And I think if he gets that time, we're going to see him become something of what Michael Hoyt has been for this team. So if you're listening, Buffalo, Landon Jackson, give him a chance. He's not the reason we lost those 2 games. But he'll be the reason this is called a crappy draft if he's not given some time on the field. Stay tuned. Let's face it, we as Bills fans have gotten a little bit spoiled over the last few seasons. Certainly having won 5 straight division titles. And certainly with the Bills making the playoffs and going deep into those playoffs most every year, Of course, with the angst created by the fact that we can't get by the Kansas City Chiefs largely and can't get a shot at that Lombardi trophy. But nonetheless, it's a little bit spoiling getting that far every season. So when the Bills encountered what they've encountered thus far this season, you could see why the fan base might be a little bit on edge. The Bills lost 2 in a row, and they had some lackadaisical play essentially in the games preceding that, especially versus the Dolphins and the Saints that were just before the Patriot and Falcon games that they both lost. And then, of course, those losses were followed by the bye, which made those even worse. You're thinking about them for an extra week, which seems like an extra month. And I'm sure the Bills went through that also. But I think what we have to say is that in the last 2 games since the bye, the Bills versus the Carolina Panthers, who won 40-9, and of course I heard comments on my videos that, well, the Panthers, don't be so happy about that. They're a bad team. That bad team just went to Lambeau Field and beat the Packers. Don't tell me how bad they are. Buffalo stopped them 40-9. And if that wasn't enough, then you had the Bills' performance against the Chiefs. And of course, even against the Chiefs, people are talking about the fact, well, it was close at the end and Buffalo should have stomped them more and let them back in. Look, they've played the Chiefs too many times, 10 times over the past 5 years or 6 years since 2020. That's like a division opponent. So don't tell me. Division opponents are difficult, and that's exactly what you have essentially with the Chiefs. But I think a lot of the trade deadline angst that developed was based on what was seen in the 4 games I referred to prior to the bye, and the worries about the secondary not being together, run stopping not being good enough, the offense not being able to produce, having bad passing games, guys not getting open. There was an attitude problem on the team. I dealt with that. The Ralph dealt with that by creating a couple of videos that I think the Bills must have watched, because we have seen the change in the team, and they definitely are displaying a lot more attitude, aggressiveness, and hostility now. And I think that will continue. But again, a lot of that trade deadline angst was built up because of the problems the Bills were suffering prior to the bye. And I think we just need to realize that a little bit and realize that the Bills just did what they did over the last 2 games without having gotten anyone in trade, without having gotten anything under our Christmas tree to magically make the team a lot better. Yes, again, I'm pissed just like Brandon Beane was that we didn't get Garrett Wilson. We all wanted it, we know. But I'm not going to let it ruin my season, and I don't think the Bills are going to let it ruin theirs. So understand that the attitude is back a little bit, and I'll be right back with our final segment. The Buffalo Bills' 17-year playoff drought is now starting to fade into history a bit, but it certainly has effects still on many fans. People that got upset by the trade or lack of trade activity for the Bills last evening on Twitter or X or whatever the hell you want to call it. Certainly, you saw it a lot there. A lot of people calling for Beane's head, for McDermott's head, for Pagula's head, for you name any number of heads on the team. And of course, that term, Debbie Downers, that we've all heard actually is an acronym, and I've informed you before on this podcast what it stands for. It's a Drought-Enhanced Buffalo Bills Insecurity Effect. And that affects a lot of fans, and again, we saw them last evening on X. But it also affects, I believe, a staff member of the Buffalo Bills in a certain way, and that would be Brandon Beane. And I'm calling it Brandon Beane's window problem. Now, in terms of window, I'm talking about the Buffalo Bills Super Bowl window. And I'm convinced that is going to remain open for years to come. As long as the Buffalo Bills have Josh Allen at quarterback, he's going to get into his early and mid-30s and still be extremely effective. Because whatever athletic drop-off he might have, and I don't think it'll be much, his ability to see and understand the game will just continue to improve. And certainly Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have preached in the past about wanting to keep that window open, wanting a sustainable situation that can go for years and years to give the team chances to win championships. But then you also have to look at examples like Howie Roseman, the general manager of the Philadelphia Eagles, or even the Los Angeles Rams. In both cases, where teams basically sacrificed draft capital to go out and get people they might need for that season to go out and get the championship and get it done. And I think we're lacking that a little bit. And that's why I call it the window problem. Brandon Beane wants to keep this window open and open and open. But at some point, you've got to just double down and go get it on a particular season. And quite frankly, if I had to give up a couple of first-round picks and a couple of second-round picks to get Quinnen Williams and Garrett Wilson on this team and through the doors at One Bills Drive this morning, I would have done it. Because go tell me where we have done so well with early round picks. If you don't have an early round pick until the late 20s or 30s, such as we normally do when losing an AFC championship game to the Chiefs, that pick isn't really worth that much. And I mean, what the hell? We're getting guys like Deion Walker in the 4th round, Jordan Hancock, Hawes. I mean, come on, we're getting great players. In fact, the Bills have demonstrated a great ability to find great talent in later rounds. I would have dumped those picks and stopped stockpiling them. Because if you're going to stockpile picks, Brandon, you need to demonstrate you know how to use them. You can't have a situation where you spend a number 1 pick last season, which you gave away to the Chiefs, just like they gave away the pick to the Chiefs that got them Patrick Mahomes. Don't get me wrong, I'd rather have Josh Allen, especially after last Sunday, and especially after as long as Josh Allen has been here. But Xavier Worthy has been effective for the Chiefs. And effective for the Chiefs against the Bills. And yet, we didn't take him and traded the pick to the Chiefs. And then, of course, took the very first pick in the 2nd round, number 33, and took Keon Coleman, who is, he may be a lot of things, but he's not Xavier Worthy, which, of course, caused us to have to go out and get Max Hairston, who is the answer to make Xavier Worthy unworthy. But the whole thing was created by not picking Xavier Worthy in the first place and maybe solving an issue of having a hotshot receiver for Josh Allen. So, Brandon, until you can demonstrate that you can really do well, especially with early round picks, where in the very first segment of this show, I went through and talked about the early round picks that haven't worked out for the Buffalo Bills. Give the damn things away. Who cares? You do great in later rounds anyway. Give them away and get the ball players in here. And I would have moved heaven and earth to get Quinnen Williams and Garrett Wilson from the New York Jets here. Now, maybe that was never going to happen. Maybe the Jets were never going to do it. But everything has its price. And you might have created a situation where the Bills will definitely win the trophy this season. But they might still. But that's the rant for today. I thank you very much for watching. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, I urge you to do so to get this type of content every single show. And I thank you very, very much if you're already subscribed. Again, we're getting close to that 1K number on subscribers. So go ahead and add yourself to that list. And until then, until we meet again, be good, do good, God bless, and go Bills. I am the Ralph, and this is the Ralph Rant. Out.